This is the United Podcast Network.
This is Voices in Validation, brought to you by IVT Network. IVT Network is your expert source for life science regulatory knowledge. Voices in Validation brings you the best in validation and compliance topics. We interview industry experts from pharma, biotech, med devices, and laboratories. Here is the host of Voices in Validation, Stacey.
Thank you, and welcome to another episode of Voices in Validation, brought to you by the IVT Network. Validation documents are critical to both the internal processes and external communications in regulated industries, such as pharma and medical devices. Properly recording and managing data is necessary to ensure the integrity and reliability of records. Good documentation practices lay down the guidelines for preparation, recording, and correction of data, as well as the maintenance of the records throughout the life cycle of a document. Today, we'll discuss key elements to achieving the best-in-class documentation with our guests, Harsha Chulki and Stephen Cook. So welcome to both of you.
Good morning.
Good morning, Stacey.
Great to have you with us. Thanks for taking some time today. There are so many reasons why good documentation and records maintenance is imperative in the pharmaceutical and medical device arenas. So let's start with the basics. What are some of the key considerations for creating best-in-class documentation? Stephen, do you want to kick us off with that?
I'm going to start with that. There's an old saying that says, if you can't be good, look good. Good quality, well-formatted documents are your frontline defense. They are your perception of control. Putting those together, putting together good templates, putting together good SOPs that go along with them, they tell an auditor that you understand what you're doing. But beyond that, when you develop good templates, and we're going to talk a little bit about what it means to develop a good template. When you develop good templates, the people that have to use them, it makes it easier for them to understand how to use them.
Sure, that definitely makes sense.
Absolutely. I was thinking about it a little bit earlier, and I'm starting to think of these templates themselves as tools. It's if in all honesty, your first step towards automating your process, right? You have templates that you go to reproduce parts of the process, which is essentially to produce documentation that is reviewed by auditors and other bodies. You make the process a lot easier when you're using templates.
It drives consistency, right? It drives
Absolutely.
Consistency. I've been at organizations where there is no standard look and feel in an SOP package, in a validation package. It's left up to the individual, and they choose the font they like to work with, and they choose the styles they like to work with.
Yep.
And so what happens is, as an organization, you don't look cohesive when you don't have a set of standards.
Right. Yeah, it looks like just a bunch of documents thrown together in the end. And of course, we know under the FDA's good documentation practices guidance, we understand that documents must be legible, traceable, reproducible, all of those things. How can organizations, in addition to the templates that you're talking about, how can organizations streamline the documentation process to ensure that these items happen consistently every time? And you're talking about consistency in the way things look and feel, but we know there's more to documentation than just the way things look. So if you can talk a little bit about that, that would be great.
So I'm going to talk
Stephen,
a little bit about what I did with Harsha at ICU. We redesigned the entire IT QMS SOP branch. So there were roughly 20 SOPs, 50 templates, forms, everything that went along with it. And that was a great opportunity because we were able to redesign everything from the ground up. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we considered was removing redundancies and inconsistencies between documents. A lot of times organizations grow organically. Somebody needs to write a backup and restore procedure, and they write it in a vacuum, not realizing that it may be impacted by other procedures. And so when you're doing this type of exercise, it's really important to understand everything that's under that umbrella, everything that is an associated reference to ensure that everything's in sync. And I'm personally a big believer in maintaining a source of truth in one location, not repeating content through multiple procedures. Harsha, do you want to add to that?
Absolutely. I think maybe it would be apt to provide a quick background to why we started looking at this aspect, and then how we, Stephen and I worked together. Starting 2017 and mostly through 18 and 19, ICU went through an acquisition. We acquired the IV business from Pfizer, which was called Hospira Infusion Systems. And one of the challenges that we ran into was how Hospira slash Pfizer managed their validation processes versus how ICU did it. And there was even a clash of cultures in some sense. So their documentation practices really spoke to that, right? And ICU has always been, always believed in lean way of doing things, which also means, we used to produce fewer documents than it might have been necessary, and obviously came under questioning a little bit. But and this goes back to what I was saying, right? It reflects really the thought process and how you deal with risk overall. So we just saw, a huge library of templates and procedures and forms and so on from Hospira that just, we were in shock, really. And then as we were trying to, integrate the systems, synchronize all of the business processes and so on, it was a huge challenge to really make sense of what to use, how to really support validation of these large systems. We migrated an entire ERP. So as you can imagine, some of the points that were already made, right? Consistency of documents, and truly they reflect upon the processes that are in use, right? That what you really are running, that are your processes. That's really what the documentation reflects. So we also ended up getting an observation on CSV. That is around the time when I took over CSV, and then we reached out and got some help. So Stephen came on board, and then we started going through all of these procedures, rewrote our CSV and aligned that to CSA, and started applying this critical thinking. So going back to the point, your documentation truly reflects upon your processes. Yeah, it is. If you don't have robust processes, at least rely on some, consistent templates that allow you to present the information. Sure, that's the entry point. As an auditor, if I start looking at these documents, I get a good sense of where the organization is going, right? So when you have clear, cohesion that is defined in terms of your QMS documents and policies and so on, that show in the documentation that you produce as well. So effectively, where we are today, it has been a long journey, but a very successful one. I think there are only handful of organizations that have actually gone through this kind of transition. Stephen can actually add a little bit more flavor to that. I think I'm just undercutting it here, not claiming enough credit, but
well, it sounds
what
like
it's helped. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think your experience is helpful to the listeners, right? Because
absolutely, yeah.
going through this process is not easy. I mean, it sounds like you made the decision to go ahead and work with Stephen to get all of these templates and everything in place because of the two companies merging. I imagine, though, that this made it a lot easier for your entire team to be able to do their jobs correctly and know what was expected of them in terms of documentation. Can you talk a little bit about your team's response to this?
Yeah. again, borrowing from what I was saying a few minutes ago, we just needed to be able to complete projects on time, right, and then stay to the schedule. So we had to make some decisions really quickly on which way we were going to go. So us with leadership support, having made the decision to really go CSA way, we knew that is where we were going to go. So what we ended up doing is, even for projects that were in flight, we decided those that are yet to take off, we were just going to start using the new templates. We're going to start using the new at least the spirit of the new process, even though it was not fully formally approved. It was going through a lot of revisions and so on. So it was more of a forward-looking thought process, Stacey, that allowed us to really start getting these templates out. And then my team obviously, developed all of these documents. But the biggest benefit of all of this was engaging with our, stakeholders, our business process owners and system owners, because now they could expect information in a very consistent manner, right? They were able to understand what each document meant, why that was required, and it was possible for them to collaborate a lot better. So as a result, now, my team doesn't spend a lot of time creating these documents. I can, probably speak about that in another session, how we can actually automate all of these things. But the benefit is now that our business process owners and our system owners, they know what to expect in these documents. They are familiar with the content. They know exactly where to go and find the specific pieces of information that they're interested in, because it reflects what's going on in a project, what changes are being made to the system.
Let me add to that too, because I want to talk about what I found at ICU before we even started doing this. And it was not that ICU had bad validation practices, frankly. I mean, what they had was a very complicated procedure that included non-GxP activities as requirements within their procedures. Things like project plans, release certificates, right? So they were doing system validations, but they weren't creating all these deliverables. And that's where they got caught up, not following their own procedure. So what I did was I aligned their procedures, not just to CSA, but also what they were doing today. And then, you asked about how his team felt about these or adopted these. I think one of my favorite conversations, I created a data migration plan template and data migration report template. And the first person that used it, he calls me one day. And when I build templates, I use red text, blue text, and black text. And the red text, it's instructions. It tells you what you're supposed to do there, and you delete it before you finalize it. Blue text is sample text. Like, if it works for you, convert it to black. Mm-hmm. If it doesn't, revise it a little bit. So I get a call from one of Harsha's Val leads, and he says, I'm writing a data migration plan, and I came across this section that talks about how to do the data sampling, and it's exactly what I need to say. Do I need to modify that? And I said, no, that's the whole point. That's why we put it in there.
To make your life easier.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep.
Take the guesswork out of it. And that way, the next person that writes a data migration plan looks just like the last person's.
So these templates and fillable forms sound amazing, right? They're great tools, as you've mentioned. What kind of upfront efforts does it take to create that kind of system? Stephen, I'm going to throw that back at you.
Management buy-in.
Okay.
Management buy-in, because it's a large scale project, right? Right. And then you have to break down silos. You have people that are invested in current processes. When you're a global organization with multiple sites, and we're still seeing this at ICU today, there are manufacturing locations that just are still very resistant to coming on board, because I think partly it's that loss of local identity. And I think, Harsha, you can probably go into more detail on that.
Well, you'll probably have to, tell me and pull me up and tell me to stop. But yes, absolutely right, Stephen's point right on. We are still experiencing some, resistance to change. And I think it's, as Stephen pointed out, more of how people react to change in general. And then to an extent, letting go of their processes, which probably they put a lot of effort in establishing in the first place, probably did, or they inherited, whatever the case may be. The concern primarily was that, is it practical? Is it valid? Does it work, in the current setup? Does it work with the change in thought process of the new organization? And I think those are some key elements to look at. Of course, management buy-in makes it a lot easier, but it if anything, just mandates that you start using the new processes. But the buy-in really has to come in from the practitioners, from the folks who use it on a daily basis, and all the other stakeholders that work on projects that actually have a stake in the business processes themselves, because that's really what you're supporting, right, through your computer systems in the end. And all of your validation documents, are the evidence to go to prove that your process is working. Probably repeating myself here, and essentially giving a pretty good understanding of how what's the level of control you have on your systems and processes overall. That is truly what you intend to demonstrate with your validation documents, right? It's not that how great what techniques you want to use in developing your tests and so on. That is a result of what you truly need to test. So I think that's a really key piece of a key factor to look into as far as changing your processes, which is really someone has put in time and developed these templates, documents, and do they really serve the need of the business at present? If they're not, start rethinking, start reworking.
Let's talk a minute about, we started with just validation procedures at ICU. That really was our original charter. And as these got adopted, as other organizations in IT saw these, the operations group, the information security, the infrastructure team, maybe interesting, maybe not so interesting, or maybe not so surprising, we actually wrote all their procedures as well. Once they saw what Harsha's team was doing, once they saw the quality of the deliverables coming out of it, it was literally like they just surrendered and said, go ahead, write it for us. And that just further made that cohesive set.
Sure. So I'm just thinking about the whole management buy-in thing, right? And sometimes you have to have some great selling points too. And thinking about why is documentation or record keeping so important to your overall quality management systems and risk management strategies. And it sounds like you had a big part in helping them to rewrite some procedures and protocols. Can you talk a little bit about how you integrated these templates and things into the QMS or QRM systems?
Sure. So we worked with the quality organization, and as Harsha said, they had done an acquisition. They were merging in a Hospira pharmaceutical division, and so from the quality on down, they had a QMS rewrite. It was going to be a new nomenclature, a new style, new everything, brand new for their documentation system. And in that end, it made it simple because quality bought into it. There was a little more resistance on the IT side. And some of that was perceptions of surrender of control over their process, right? To have somebody else write their backup and restore, to have somebody else write their disaster recovery. We worked with them to make sure that they felt like they were stakeholders and that their input was valued and that we were including their comments. But there was a lot of back and forth with Harsha's management to understand the need for this. There were audit findings in terms of gaps in the IT QMS, gaps in procedures, a lot of tribal knowledge that existed, but nothing that was documented.
To add a little bit more, there are other examples where there may have been good reason why this was done in the past. Someone would go and validate components of your infrastructure, like your switches and routers. They really add no value, really, right? And what impact do they have on the product you make? What impact do they have on your QMS system overall? So these are all some really risk-averse thought process elements that we needed to start bringing up to the management and point out that, look, this old process isn't going to work. This is just documentation that doesn't serve the purpose at all, and we can't sustain in the new organization this way of thinking and this way of doing things. So that makes it a lot easier to have a conversation with, let's say, your infrastructure or a security or operations teams, because then they see the value, because that they want to deploy robust and secure infrastructure and systems as soon as possible. And if validation gets in the way, then it's just a problem. So you need to really collaborate, engage with them as a partner, and then help them understand that there is actually value in engaging in this process.
I think Harsha brings up a great point, because we very carefully crafted in scope and out of scope within these procedures. And we did that to try and, in an attempt to reel in some of these, I'm going to call them bad behaviors, but perhaps it's more risk adverse behaviors. As Harsha said, validating things that were unnecessary, that were not expectations, interpretations on data integrity that far exceeded what regulators expect, right? So we very carefully constructed these procedures to try and target some of those organizational and cultural issues. And with the quality buy-in from the top, getting that quality of signature from the top gave us that defense to go back to these people and say, no, this is our process moving forward.
Yeah, to help them with that mindset shift, right? which is so important. So aside from getting the team's buy-in, whether it's management or whether it's the quality team or the IT team, what do you think were the biggest challenges in creating a good documentation system here?
Stephen, can I toss it over to you?
Yeah. So a lot of collaboration, a lot of meetings, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of revisions that went into these documents, trying to make sure that everybody was happy with the final product and the final result. And not only that, but when I started these procedures out, I really wrote them in a way of what I would consider regulatory expectations. And frankly, there were some things in there that ICU thought we're going to move the needle, but we're not ready to move the needle that far. So in some cases, we had to dial back what the commitments were within those procedures.
Okay, fair enough. So it sounds like it's very time and labor intensive for everyone involved. But obviously what you got out of it is a much better process, much better system.
And just from a basics perspective, start with good templates to build your templates.
That makes sense. And that leads me to another question that I had on the templates, right? So we're talking about, throughout this whole conversation, I keep hearing one word said over and over again, and it's consistency, which is so important, right, in this industry. Yep. And I'm curious about how these documentation systems that you're talking about consistently yield high quality documents, right, that maintain globally accepted standards. You're talking about the FDA standards and regulations throughout the organization. Obviously we have Harsha here from ICU Medical, and it's a fantastic case study, but thinking to even larger companies where they might have a global presence. So there might be several locations that are all expected to be working on said documents. Can you talk a little bit about that, Stephen, from that from the provider perspective, and then Harsha, I'm going to throw that over to you too to talk about, what it's meant for your organization to have these consistent documents that are conforming to regulatory standards. And, because one might think you just need to have a really good team of great writers, but I don't think that's the case. So can you speak to that a little bit, Stephen?
Yeah, sure. Let's start out with a basic mechanics, right? When I built the templates of templates for ICU,
yeah,
everybody knows on the home in Word you have the style gallery. What a lot of people don't know is you can suppress what styles get displayed, and you can make it so that those styles are not editable.
okay.
So ICU's templates only show the styles that they're allowed to use within that document. That's first and foremost. That prevents drift over time in those templates. Secondly, and I think Harsha really can add to this, because we started out this being enterprise, right? They were enterprise procedures, but the manufacturing sites hadn't adopted them at that point. And we're now in the process of rolling these out to enterprise. And there are, as you said, global organizations have small differences sometimes from site to site, sometimes big differences from site to site. So
right.
The way we're handling that at ICU is, as we work with these manufacturing sites, we're giving them a couple options. We'll either revise the enterprise procedure and put in appendices that talk about local requirements, or they use the same numbering schema. For example, his computer software assurance procedure is 2001-SOP. If a local site has their own process that they want to follow, they can create a 2001 work instruction under that. And it keeps everything tied together.
Okay. It sounds like it's easy to follow along with.
Yep.
Harsha, what's your team experience been with this?
Yeah, like Stephen said, Stacey, it's again the point that we made a few times already: consistency, right? Our take and thought process really is quite simple. The global IT organization supports multiple locations around the globe, and multiple business offices as well, and they have various compliance needs for which they rely on IT. So, as Stephen also pointed out, while rewriting the QMS, specifically reworking the validation processes and templates, we started working on the IT SOPs. QMS being the starting point. So what this allows us to do is engage with all of those stakeholders, not just here in the States, even outside. We take part. We have ICU has achieved MDSAP certification. We need to maintain it, which means you need to also comply with regulatory requirements, not just here in the States, but many other global regulatory agencies as well. So that makes it even more important, in my opinion, that you have consistency across your processes, your templates, because you don't want to start worrying about what you need to do for Japan, what do you need to do for EU. It's just not doable. You just can't. And how many different ways are you going to really skin the cat, right? That's what it comes down to. You can't, because we need to really support the business. We need to get the IT processes working for everybody, which means one set of templates and a global procedure that accommodates these variances is the right way to go. So hence we talk to the sites about creating appendices for their need, so that we have a very neatly defined workflow through flowcharts that makes it even further. That makes it a lot easier for folks to understand what's really going on without having to read. And then we try to keep our procedures short as well, which means now the information is right there for them to consume and absorb quickly, understand the intent, and then start aligning their process overall. So I think this is a really great outcome of engaging with those sites for us.
And Stacey, there are a lot of conversations and negotiations that happen with those sites. I don't want to minimize that
Sure.
effort. You know, a lot of times it's convincing them to adopt it, taking into concern taking into consideration their concerns, and then we don't want to build out appendices that are just as long as the procedure that account for their local requirements. So
Right.
there, and again, I come back to management buy-in, senior quality buy-in to say this is the direction that we're going.
Right. No, and it sounds, I get it. You do all the work up front so you don't have to do it again,
Yep.
right? Down the road. And it
Absolutely.
sounds like the systems, the templates and the systems and the workflows that you're putting in place sound pretty intuitive. Is there any kind of specialized team training that's required once you're up and running, or is it really that intuitive that people can hop right in? Harsha, what did you find with that?
I was going to say yes. It's quite intuitive. People can definitely, hop right in. Again, the core idea is risk-based decision making, and then that makes it a lot easier for folks to understand, what we are talking about. And different folks have different perceptions of risk and different reactions, and what they think is a risk or not. So, again, creating sort of a framework, if you will, around what that really means. And CSA was great for us in that sense because we could focus on what we do here. Does it have an impact on the product we make? Does it have an impact on the patient safety overall? And does it have any impact, or is it does it affect any of the regulatory requirements? So those are some key elements that you look at, and that allows you to make decisions from that point onwards. So when you represent that as a diagram, as a workflow, I think it's a lot easier for people to understand what how you need to proceed from there forward. And that's sort of the idea that is central to a lot of these procedures that Stephen helped us put together. And we have this consistently depicted in many of our core processes, which makes it easier for folks who we engage with to see what it is. Yeah, I did not want to downplay the initial effort that goes into it, but what we have to what we I think folks are realizing now is that we put a lot of thinking into it up front, and then now we're starting to see the benefits. Right? It does take a lot of effort, and it does take a lot of conversations, negotiations, but now folks know what they're following, and makes it a lot easier for us to generate the documents that are necessary.
And I would imagine it really frees everybody up to really just think about those more important big picture items rather than worry about how they're documenting.
And I think again, talking about the CSA, key risk indicator factors is really what allowed the management, right, the executive leadership, also to start aligning. There was a lot of resistance. There was a lot of hesitation. I think that's the right way. That's the right word here in adopting, because folks for any number of reasons, and to some extent lack of hands-on experience. They may have done this in the past, but they're not doing it today. They're not talking to the business folks. They're not talking to the various stakeholders of the processes. They're looking at it from a 20,000 foot view. So they had to start. I think a lot of our presentations around risk factors and managing those factors through this lens really shifted the conversation for us. Without it, it would have been really difficult, and we perhaps would still have been struggling with somewhat site unique processes. So once we got that buy-in, I think it was a lot easier. Things were a lot easier. We were able to get a lot more done in a relatively short amount of time after that.
Right. And ultimately, that is the goal here. So it sounds like, you've come out on the other side and you're in a much better place than you would have been, certainly. And I think for the benefit of our listeners, hearing your story is really just solidifies the need for, or the reasons for, I guess, organizations to pursue this kind of documentation system so that they can be more efficient and their teams can really focus on the key elements of their business rather than some of these detail-oriented type of tasks.
Yes.
So I thank you both for sharing that with us today. And as we get ready to wrap up, I just want to give each of you a couple of moments to share any last thoughts or ideas with our listeners.
Final
Stephen,
thoughts,
go ahead and start us
and
off.
Harsha alluded to this. Every procedure we wrote at the beginning includes a process flow chart. Not everybody can read something and understand it. Some people need that visual to help them define how to do it. So every single procedure, from his validation procedure through retirement, back and restore, every one of them has a process flow chart. And then the other, get your people Word training. Word is not a typewriter. It's not a typewriter. It's a powerful tool, but most people don't know how to use it.
Sure. And everybody thinks they do.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I learned quite a few things about Word that I didn't use previously, or perhaps didn't pay enough attention to. In working with Steve, sometimes would joke about Steven as being the word Nazi, but I think you do need someone like that who says, look, who lays the rules down and says if you are going to start putting a set of templates and so on, you're going to have to start following these rules. And I think that is fair, right? We have to start thinking about the bigger picture, as I already mentioned it probably a couple of times, because that is the ultimate goal, to be able to develop documents that we so much depend on, at key moments.
One of Harsha's VAL leads, I did Word training there. One of his VAL leads, a couple months later, came to me and said, I used to spend so much time formatting my documents, manually pushing things here and there, and now it's so quick. I wish I'd known this so long ago because it saves me so much time.
Yes.
There you go. That's what happens when you learn how to use the tools you have in your tool bag, right?
Yep.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Harsha and Stephen, for being our guests this week. It's been so great to chat with you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for having me, Stacey. It's a pleasure.
Of course. Likewise. Also, I want to give a big shout out to our producer, Ben Kitchen, and the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. Lastly, a big thanks to you, our valued listeners. If you have topic requests or guest suggestions, you can message us via LinkedIn or through our website. If you enjoyed today's episode, head on over to your podcast player of choice and subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Plus, don't forget to share with your friends, colleagues, and online networks. We appreciate your help in spreading the word. For today's show notes and resources from this episode, please visit www.ivtnetwork.com. We'll be back again next week with another great discussion. Until then, make it a great week.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.